Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome to AI and the Future of Work. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly on the show. And the added bonus, you get one AI fun fact each week. Today's fun fact, Michael Nunez writes in VentureBeat about how enterprise leaders are betting big on AI despite growing security concerns. Nunez summarizes a new report from ISG and Glean, home of great former podcast guest Arvin Jain. It surveyed 224 IT execs, and the results were budgets for AI-first projects are likely to triple in the next 18 months, rising from a current 1.5% to 10% by 2025. The execs expect AI solutions to improve worker productivity by 40%. The report also indicated that 73% of leaders are wary of AI entering the enterprise through shadow IT, where employees experiment with tools that haven't been purchased or approved by their employers. Early adopters indicated satisfaction with AI results, with 43% saying they've seen better than expected results so far, despite only 28% saying they've generated positive ROI. The top use cases leaders surveyed are investing in are AI for customer service and enterprise search. No surprise, that's what Glean does, with 84% of all respondents indicating those are driving new AI investments. Of course, we'll link to the full article in today's show notes, and we'll continue to monitor CXO sentiment toward AI, both in terms of the rewards and the risks. And you know what? We'll start right now by spending time with two experts who are at the forefront of enterprise AI trends. Naomi, Ionita, and Derek Xiao are investors at Menlo Ventures, one of the most successful and storied venture capital funds in Silicon Valley. Menlo has backed more than 80 public companies, manages more than $5 billion in assets, and has been a pillar of the VC community for an astonishing 47 years. You know many of Menlo's recent high-profile investments in companies like Anthropic, Chime, and Harness, as well as historical investments like 3Com, Hotmail, and Roku. Naomi and Derek recently led the firm's publication of a 3,500-word report chronicling the state of generative AI in the enterprise. It's a must-read for entrepreneurs as well as CXOs. Today, we get to unpack what they learned, and of course, we will link to that full report in the show notes. Without further ado, Naomi and Derek, it is my pleasure to welcome you to AI and the Future of Work. Let's get started by having you both share a bit more about your background and how you got into VC.
Thanks for having us. As you shared, Menlo is a leading multi-stage venture capital firm. We're investing heavily in AI out of our $1.35 billion fund, our 16th that we just announced. We've been lucky to partner with portfolio companies you mentioned, like Anthropic, Pinecone, Benchling, Chime, Abnormal Security, and more. I personally am a partner on the early stage team. I lead SaaS and AI investing from seed to Series B. I joined Menlo after about 13 years on the operating side in product growth and revenue roles. So it's a real privilege to get to partner with founders now on this side of the table.
Absolutely. And I'm Derek. I cover AI infrastructure and application investing at Menlo, work with Naomi, Tim, Matt, and a couple of our other partners. And we've been very excited to have a front row seat to all of the exciting things that are happening in both the infrastructure and application side of AI.
You both are on the bleeding edge of trends in AI investing. How would you describe the current state of VC? Is this, as some would say, the best time ever to be an entrepreneur? Or as others would say, it's the worst time? Or maybe the answer is more nuanced. What do you think?
Yeah, certainly. The answer, we believe that the answer is a little nuanced here. I think there's two perspectives you could perhaps take here. One is from a capital market point of view, and maybe I'll cover that, and then Naomi can talk about the tech wave perspective. But from a capital market point of view, it's no secret that right now is what many would consider, a down market. It's certainly not the velocity is not as fast as 2 years ago. Maybe some of the valuations are down from 2 years ago, certainly in public markets. And it seems like in everything outside of AI. But I think the important thing that we keep in mind is that as venture investors, we're thinking on 10-year time horizons. And that's how long, we think about for our funds. That's how long we partner with all of our companies. And so during these time spans, down markets will happen. And it's not really a question of if, it's when. And so there's no real right time to start a company. And through the life cycle of a company, you will encounter a down market. And so we think that generational companies will be built at any time. And certainly right now with what's happening with AI, we see a lot of very exciting companies getting started.
I think that's a great point, Derek. And beyond just the state of venture capital or, the macro climate, we are thinking a lot about where we are in these tech curves. So now is a particularly inspiring time for both founders and investors with the meteoric rise of large language models, the launch of ChatGPT a year ago. I mean, this is like a once in a decade platform shift when you think of this opportunity around AI. In the whole history of computing, we've only had a small handful of these: mainframe, internet, cloud, mobile. Now with AI, I mean, the biggest companies to come out of Silicon Valley rode one of these new tech waves. And these radical breakthroughs created new ways for consumers to do something that they'd never been able to before. It forced enterprises to completely rethink workflows and what's possible. So there's a lot of nuance on how this is going to play out, but this is definitely this Cambrian moment powered by AI that we're so energized by.
I teased in the intro the 2023 State of Generative AI report that you just published. What surprised you most about what you learned during doing the research?
Yeah, 2023 was such a frenzy, right? We all were just so captivated by how AI was going to change how we live, how we work. And the thing that, resonated with us loud and clear was that 2023 was truly a year of experimentation. And we think 2024 is going to be the year of true adoption. So Derek and I surveyed over 450 enterprise executive buyers. We interviewed dozens more, and AI was top of mind for all these decision makers, but a shockingly low number actually had systems in production. We sized the market of Gen AI at about $2.5 billion versus the $400 billion of total cloud spend. So 1% drop in the bucket. And this report was really important to us because we wanted to uncover what those barriers were, both from just understanding the market from a buy standpoint, but also as we advise our founders how to think about go-to-market in this new age of AI. First and foremost, the biggest barrier was, does it work? These concerns around unproven ROI were paramount through and through. And folks are also still thinking through, what can AI actually solve or not solve? What new workflows can be automated or totally transformed? How do we build with these different tools? All within the proper safeguards of privacy, security, hallucinations. We found that trust is really paramount here. And frankly, the whole ecosystem is still earning buyer and end user trust. So we were, marrying all this promise and excitement in 2023 with the real concerns and hesitations that are top of mind in 2024. And that's why it's taken a year for a lot of these platforms to really be productionized. And we're excited to see what this year brings.
As an AI entrepreneur, I feel like 2020 was the year when AI went from being a technology business story to a story about humanity. And I probably have a little bit of a skewed perspective, but I'm curious if in the 450 plus conversations you had, did it feel like you were discussing more than a business story?
I think that when we talk with entrepreneurs as well as buyers about AI, they talk a lot about, not just what can we automate, but what can we transform? And then also what are the larger societal impacts of this? It's something that comes up a lot. And it comes up both as an opportunity and as a risk, right? So on the opportunity side, obviously AI has this capability of really revolutionizing how we, work, live, and play. But on the kind of risk side, there's all kinds of things about hallucinations, about IP rights, about some of these unknowns. As with any any shift in computing history, there's a lot of questions about how this transforms society and how do we do it in a responsible way. And so I think we hear both of these things. And as we think about as investors, where we want to play and how we want the companies that we partner with, I think it's very top of mind to do it in the right way. And, we partnered with Anthropic, who's pioneering safe AI as an example. And then as we build, the infrastructure stack with Unstructured and Pinecone and some of the other kind of companies that we've looked at that are doing retrieval augmented generation, this is something that guarantees more personalized as well as just safer AI. I think that's something that we're very mindful about.
Yeah, another point that I'd add is, a lot of founders that we spend time with in these communities we've become embedded in, they've adopted AI as religion, right? It's become so exciting and people are just so captivated by this moment. But we're also trying to counsel folks that just building technology for the sake of technology, like it needs to be rooted in some real pain point, some real problem. And we're very first principles investors. So sometimes we come across people that just want to build an AI and just want to capture this moment. And it's important to really think about at the end of the day, who are you solving a problem for? How is this a net new way to solve that problem? What kind of value are you creating? Is there a real business behind this? So we're still, SaaS and infrastructure investors at the end of the day, and AI is an accelerant of all these promises for end users and customers. But having that sort of those ground truths top of mind is important as well.
Naomi, you mentioned earlier platform shifts over the last couple decades. And I believe that unlike the shift to cloud, for example, or unlike the shift to mobile, the shift to AI is the first time that we as humans are holding up a mirror to ourselves and having to answer the question, what does it mean to be a human in an era when potentially our colleague's a bot? And, what are these skills that I thought were innately human that I've invested in, for decades or years, or, what's that fancy degree hanging on the wall mean if all of a sudden, that bot that's my colleague, can do math better than me and write better code than me and dot. To me, this feels like more than just a platform shift. What did the research bear out? And we'd love to know your personal perspectives on that, the difference this time around.
Yeah, I love this question. I mean, I've always focused on workflow automation. I always said I want to invest in products that strip away the mundane, painful, kind of soul-sucking parts of people's jobs so they can focus on higher order problems. And AI is just an accelerant of that promise. This isn't net new when you think of this promise around automation. And so what I think about here for all of humanity is we all have parts of our job, hours and hours each week that we're spending searching for something, data entry, emailing stuff around. If the machine could take some of that work off of our plates, wow, as a society, how can we all level up the types of problems we get to solve, the types of creative and human solutions that we can come up with? So I think it's a real opportunity for all of us to think about how we spend our days and where we want leverage on our time.
So you got me and all the other entrepreneurs listening, hanging on your every word, waiting for the big reveal about what it is that enterprise buyers are where they're looking to invest this year and beyond. Here's your big chance. Give us the download.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talked with enterprise buyers at the end of last year, we heard loud and clear that AI is and will continue to be an imperative, right? The report indicated that the median AI budget was up 8% last year, and that outpaced all other categories of enterprise tech spend. So really, when we asked then where that spend was going, there's three things that we primarily heard. First one is AI infrastructure. So we call this the modern AI stack. When you think about working with LLMs, which are fundamentally non-deterministic machines, this is something that's completely different than anything else that we've seen in compute history before. And as a result of that, you need a new tech stack in order to actually push these systems into production. And so the LLM revolution is really also a rebuild of enterprise tech stacks. And we see a couple of core components here. At the foundation model layer, there's players like OpenAI and Anthropic that are providing the foundation model itself. At the data layer above it, there's data ingestion, such as unstructured. There's the vector database, such as Pinecone, as well as data cleaning, such as Clean Labs. And then above it, perhaps there's orchestration, such as LangChain, and then observability. And so we see a new stack, like the modern data stack a couple years prior, emerging for this new space. And we think that there's a lot of buyers that are experimenting with different pieces of this, but these are kind of the core components that we see as we see systems come into production.
Yeah, those are the picks and shovels on the infrastructure side. We're also looking deeply at the application layer and collecting all the insights from the market in that regard. I mentioned kind of horizontal AI solutions, things that drive cost and time savings down. That's top of mind for every CXO, especially in this macro. We're looking for these context-aware, kind of data-rich workflows that unlock AI adoption. Sometimes, it's in the form of next-gen RPA or internal app or tool builders, different types of workflow automation that really can activate different personas and use cases across the organization. New agent platforms are a novel approach here, and we're excited to see, what the future holds for those. It's early days, but super exciting. And then there's the vertical AI element here. There's a bunch of vertical specific solutions that we're going to continue to see emerge. Take legal or healthcare, for example. These categories have been so burdened with endless data, paperwork, manual workflows, just really crappy, archaic systems. We've been looking at the world of insurance, payer, back office operations. There's a lot here. Derek actually has been driving some of our thesis work in healthcare specifically.
Yeah, just to offer one example here, there's a world that we call clinical workflow automation. So right now, you have a ton of nurses that are being hired both by providers as well as on the payer side. A lot of folks who are just manually processing paperwork, essentially. They're reading, let's say that you go to the doctor and you need a surgery, right? There's a process called prior authorization, where before you get the surgery, your doctor needs to send a note to your insurer and say, hey, Dan is getting the surgery, will you pay for it? And right now, both on the provider side as well as on the payer side, there's just teams of nurses that are just in a room all day processing the paperwork to say, here's Dan's medical history, here's why the surgery is medically necessary. You send it over, and then they do the same check against the payer guidelines to see whether or not the payer will actually pay it. This is something that, if you talk with the nurse, no nurse actually wants to do this paperwork, and is a perfect use case for LLMs to automate that. And so there's a lot of these types of workflows across all types of verticals that we're really excited for LLMs to take over and free up nurses to actually do practice at the top of their license.
We've had some great conversations on this podcast with health tech entrepreneurs. Like Dr. Shiv Rao is the CEO of a great company called Abridge, took a similar task, the patient-doctor interaction, and is automating or transcribing conversations so that doctors can be more present with patients. So firmly believe that thesis. That those are good examples, Derek. So this new stack that you talk about, stack makes sense. There's one thing that I'll push back on. When I'm biased because of what PeopleRain does, and maybe the two of you are biased because of investments that Menlo has made, but it's that infrastructure layer that you mentioned. I believe it's part of the new stack, but most of my conversations are with CXOs who are looking to app vendors to abstract the need for them to make investments directly in infrastructure. Am I wrong? Or maybe, again, maybe it's selective listening I have, but how does that differ with what you heard?
Yeah, certainly. I think that there's also two things going on here, right? We think about the app infrastructure cycle, and on the application side, you need infrastructure pieces in order to build great apps. And then on the infrastructure side, you need people to actually build with your infrastructure in order to have folks to sell into. And in 2023, like a lot of where the initial spend went, we believe went towards infrastructure providers. You see that with OpenAI and Anthropic, and folks are just playing around with it, seeing what's possible and getting their hands dirty, rolling up their sleeves and playing with the infrastructure itself. As we go to 2024, we think a lot of these systems will come into production now. And that's why there's a great opportunity for applications to really kind of rise to the forefront. And maybe that's more reflective of some of the conversations that you've been having, where a lot of folks don't really want to, play with a Anthropic or an unstructured or a Pinecone. They just want something that works for their workflows. And so now there's a great opportunity for a lot of builders, a lot of early entrepreneurs that we've been talking to push these horizontal or vertical solutions.
Yeah, we saw this breakdown in our report. We looked at AI spend by department, and more than half of that spend did go to product and engineering. So these are the teams trying to build from the ground up. And then the next biggest segment was about a quarter of the dollars were flowing to sales and marketing, and then more of a fragmented view from there. So it's both for sure, and it's certainly going to permeate every single department and champion and budget holder.
The cynics among us will say that ultimately AI spend will go toward big tech, who are basically going to hoover up all the opportunities that startups think they have and offer one kind of vertically integrated platform from infrastructure on up to app. And all you're going to do is pay Uncle Microsoft, another whatever, $150 per month per employee. And bam, you got everything you need, soup to nuts, with regard to AI. How can entrepreneurs or how can startups compete with big tech?
This is the $1 million or $1 billion question here, and one we talk about a lot internally. you can't deny the weight of the incumbents. And looking at the data from our report, about 60 or 70% of the spend went to incumbent solutions like a Microsoft Copilot or a GitHub Copilot. They have the advantages of scale, data, distribution, brand, trust, engineering resources. They're wielding their weight for sure. But we do think there's room moving forward for startups to compete with more AI native approaches. We don't think it's always as simple as just layering AI features onto an existing workflow or platform, but really rethinking about these, complex architectures from the ground up. There's a lot of different by being more context aware and by using data in new ways, we think that net new startups are going to have an easier job kind of rewriting these workflows.
And we especially love this idea of a data-rich, context-aware workflow, right? And this is something that startups can tackle in a way that is Gen AI native, as opposed to more of a tack-on solution to an existing SaaS product. And a few examples of these. One would be a closed feedback loop. And Typeface is one of our portfolio companies that has this idea of an affinity layer. Typeface, to take a step back, is Gen AI native marketing solution. And they have this affinity layer where when you put out a new piece of content, whether that is a blog post, an image, whatever it may be, they learn from the user feedback to that blog post. How is it performing? What is the reaction to it? Whatever metric that you care about, they take that as reinforcement learning so that the next time that they generate a similar blog post or image, it gets smarter and more responsive to user feedback. Eppo is very similar. It's another portfolio company of theirs. It's a data warehouse native experimentation platform, and you can use them to really test not only on the front end, but also on the back end, any of the changes to your AI or ML models. So does a GPT-4 or Claude outperform a Llama 2 or a Bloom? And so you could really hone in on kind of the feedback loop that your users are giving you. That before LLMs, quite frankly, a lot of this data was just lost. It was there, but nobody was really taking it and using it to improve the product. So that's one example. There's also agentic platforms that we're quite excited about, and then next-gen retrieval architectures that are more advanced than just like naive RAG is what we call it, that we think are more sophisticated approaches that we're starting to see now.
That's a tease. Agentic architectures, and then what you're calling naive RAG. Many listeners would think that the current state of RAG is interesting and not naive at all. What's the difference between naive today and where we're headed? And then what's the difference between some of the early agentic architectures, which I think have disappointed many early adopters, and what you expect to see ahead?
Yeah, exactly. It's a great question. So what I call naive RAG is this more programmatic approach to retrieval augmented generation. And so when you think about the RAG pipeline, everything from chunking at the front end of it and creating the embeddings, the standard approach, if you just go on LangChain today, is to chunk by character length. And so you're just saying like every 1,000 characters or so, I'm gonna chunk a piece. And that seems pretty naive to me, where the better approach is to have a more context awareness of the actual document structure. If you have tables in your document, if you have headers, footers, the way that the document actually reads. So these are all pieces where you could create better embeddings on the front end. And then when you actually retrieve them, you can piece together more of the actual context that maybe a human would recall if you think about all the context that you're bringing to a specific task, as opposed to what's just semantically similar. And so these are areas that we see a ton of innovation on. There's things, and then as we move from just RAG to more chaining different thoughts together, chain of thought, tree of thought, and other kind of approaches that push us more towards agentic architectures. These are things that we're very excited about, where there's a lot more research, but also a lot more kind of just regular SWEs that are tackling some of these problems and creating promising solutions.
And part of what's going to make these agents really win, because I hear you, I think a lot of the early promise of, again, the machine's just going to take all this busy work off my plate and I get to focus on the cool stuff. Do they really work? Are they as performant as we all expect? I think part of this phase of AI maturity is to really discover and build solutions that address a clear wedge, a specific pain point for a specific persona, because you're just leaving too much right now to the technology to have these handoffs of multiple agents working on your behalf. These can be brittle handoffs today, but as you think about specifically who you're solving for, specifically, we talked about clinical decision-making and healthcare. We're looking at some in ticket resolutions for, support or software engineers, enterprise search across a whole host of systems for, your average knowledge worker. Thinking about what is the end goal for this specific job to be done really is where we're going to see the performance gains here versus trying to be everything to everyone when the technology is still quite nascent.
We talk a lot in this podcast about what it means to practice responsible AI. And you both alluded earlier to enterprise concerns about everything from hallucinations, and then I would add to the list copyright violations, potentially mental health impact if the LLMs go off the rails, things that are genuine concerns, certainly in the enterprise. Now, do you feel like, or at least from your research, does that create an opportunity for startups, or does it create an impediment because enterprise buyers first have to get comfortable with the behavior of these LLMs before they're willing to make big investments?
I love this question. I think there's definitely a journey that we're all on as an industry and frankly as a society. To tie back to the report, when we said what were the biggest barriers to adoption, number one was around that proven ROI, but number two was this data privacy and security concerns. At the end of the day, you're going to have these executives, CIO, CISO, that are just going to be repeating this drumbeat of, is this safe? Is this secure? And the quick number three was around data architecture. It's hard to work with existing enterprise data and systems. And so how does AI actually integrate here, to get something in production? So these issues, before AI and after AI and whatever comes next beyond AI are going to be top of mind for buyers. And it's hard to ignore that for founders today. So yes, you're spot on. And it's ringing loud and clear.
Yeah. And we certainly see a couple of, as we look forward, we see the way that this market evolves is probably in a couple of ways. First, I think that there's a certain market maturity element to it, where if you look back to cloud, when AWS first rolled out, there was a ton of data concerns around it of where my data would live. Can I trust giving all of my enterprise data to a third party? And we see some of the same questions here with LLMs. And as more people start trusting it today, even heavily regulated industries like finance and healthcare have cloud architectures, and we expect the same for LLMs. But then the other part of it is just going with enterprises or partners that you can trust in this journey. And, I mentioned earlier that we partnered with Anthropic, are founded on the mission of building the safest, most reliable foundation models in the world. And they have entire research teams dedicated to minimizing hallucinations. They have a novel approach called constitutional AI that is focused on ensuring alignment between user intentions and what the LLMs output. And then they have fine-grained customization capabilities. So enterprises can tune their model right in their own VPCs. With their partnership with Amazon too, this is a conversation that we've had with a lot of CXOs recently, where now enterprises, if they are an AWS shop, for example, they don't even have to move the data out of their VPC in order to input it into their LLM and create an AI application for their end customers. So these are a lot of the things about finding the right partner to work with, as well as just over time, we expect that folks will get more comfortable with working with LLMs.
There's so much more to unpack in this report. Unfortunately, we're bad out of time, but you're not getting off the hot seat without answering one last question for me. Fast forward a year from now, when we're having a version of this conversation about the 2024 or the 2025 preview of what's ahead or what the current trends are in enterprise Gen AI. How is this conversation different a year from now?
Yeah, I think that 2023 was really a year of trying things out. And there was a lot of talk about, what strategy should we take and how do we, let's just go out and try something. Let's tire kick on a lot of different solutions and experiment with what to build and how to build it. And a lot of the early spending went towards infrastructure. And these were things where you didn't necessarily have to have an application in production. You were just playing with various building blocks and pieces and seeing what stuck. But a year from now, I think that we're shifting away from the infrastructure piece of it towards what's now actually possible and then putting out applications.
I'm also thinking about some second order impacts of AI. One is around how it's going to impact pricing. and just think about the underlying business models for a lot of companies, especially at the application layer. If you think of historical pricing around being seat-based, now there's been a big rise of usage-based and hybrid models. What about charging per outcome? How is AI going to actually enable efficiency and actually rethink how these products are valued, how many employees across the organization they touch or replace in some cases? And so fundamental business models are going to evolve with the rise of AI. That led to our investment in Orb, which is a billing, metering, and pricing and packaging iteration company that helps you establish these rails so that you can continue to iterate on your business model as needed, especially with the rise of AI today.
I hope that a year from now, the conversation is focused more on AI value and, to your point, AI outcomes versus AI curiosity or science experiments. That would be a wonderful step in the evolution of this as a technology that benefits humans, that delivers better experiences, because that's really, as certainly as your results indicated, the promise of generative AI. Hey, Naomi and Derek, this has been an absolute pleasure. Excellent work generating this report. I know how much effort went into it, and I know it's a whole team approach, but just great work bringing this to market. It's a great resource. Anything else that you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap up?
We just closed our newest fund, 1.35 billion from seed to growth. So we are open for business and excited to meet the next gen of builders in AI.
Derek, any last thoughts?
Just echoing Naomi, I think that we see this is a generational opportunity right now. We're quite excited across everything from infrastructure to applications, just the best entrepreneurs building things that just simply weren't possible before with LLMs. And so very excited for what's to come.
Hey, both of you, thanks for hanging out. I really enjoyed this and great work.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
That is a wrap for this week on AI and the future of work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from PeopleRain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.